her earlier roots, her archaic roots. So the religion of Artemis evolved from an early tribal and perhaps even nomadic period in the Mediterranean basin. Her worship predates all other Olympians, although when we talk about Demeter and even Aphrodite, for example, these are goddesses and Hecate. These are goddesses that have such ancient roots that we can also claim that these goddesses were pre-Greek pantheon. Actually, the only gods that don't have a pre-Greek heritage are the men. When the Northerners, which were tribes of men, came down into the Mediterranean and took over the area of the Mediterranean, one of the things that they did is they assimilated the goddesses who ruled supreme in this area by marrying them off or giving them a sort of a male protector.
Welcome to the One-on-One Podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
Welcome to another episode of the One-on-One Podcast. I'm your host as always. You know where to find me. All the links will be in the social. All the social media links will be in the description below, on the video or on the show notes. And today, joining me as a co-host is Gabe, and then we have Dr. Carla Ionescu. And Gabe, can you plug your stuff real quick? Because I would let the ladies go first today because we're going to be talking about divine feminine, but I want Carla to take it away after she's done introducing herself. So Gabe, can you plug your stuff real quick?
Absolutely. Slick Dissident on YouTube. I'm also with the Weaving Spiders Welcome, or sometimes we go by Weaving Spiders Web on YouTube, also on Rockfin, and I'm with Chance Garton on Rockfin, also on YouTube at Interverse. That's my jam.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking about Artemis. Anything Greek, Roman, Greco-Roman, whatever, I love, right? Because I'm really deep into Pythagoras. I love Pythagoras. I love Plato. I love all those guys. And today we have Dr. Ionescu with us, who's going to be talking about Artemis. Can you plug your social media, your podcast, your YouTube? Because I think you have some really good presentations on there that I think people would really enjoy, because I definitely enjoy them, and I don't have people on the show who I don't enjoy their work. So,
well, thank you so much. Okay, so my social media is Artemis Expert across the board on all the platforms. And then the podcast is The Goddess Project, and that's on YouTube and also on Instagram. That's just for people who want to just listen to the podcast and might not want to watch me do ridiculous things around the world in museums, you know.
Yeah, because I saw your pictures. You've traveled quite a bit all over.
Yeah. You know, I once went to Malta. Sorry, this is a sidetrack, but I once went to Malta and I spent the whole day looking at coins and filming coins. And then my whole Instagram was like 8 posts of, look how fun these coins are. And I'm sure that all my students and half the people following me were like, oh my God, what is Carla doing? So, yeah. Did
you plug your book?
Oh, yes. And my book. I even have a copy of it. Yes. She Who Hunts.
Yeah, I got I do electronic versions. I love the hunt. I love the hunt, right? Because we're going to be talking about the huntress of finding a book, going into the bookstore and looking for a book. But it's just, I don't have room for it. So I just buy everything and I put it on my tablet. But I did get the electronic version. So I'll put the link to the book in the description as well. And I wanted to ask you, Carla, what got you into this? Because it's a very niche field. And why did you focus? Can you tell people what you focused on? Because this is very esoteric. And yes. Take it away.
Actually, yes. Okay, so my PhD is actually on Artemis, and my dissertation was on Artemis of Ephesus, but part of that was some work on the Greek Artemis, so I was connecting all of this. I kind of fell into Artemis, to be honest. I went to school, to university, whatever. After high school, I went to law school for a bit. I did my degree in psych. I did all this. I was like what they call the eternal student. You know, I have like 3 degrees and 2 masters, and I just didn't want to leave school, I guess. And I told my dad when I went to law school for a year, I told my dad, I don't like it, so I want to do something else. And when he asked me, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do ritual and archaeology. And he said, how are you going to make money? What are you going to do? You know? And I didn't really know. So I had a mentor, like a professor that then I took a lot of his courses. He was into religious studies, Christianity, Judaism, all of these things. And he was really a really fantastic teacher. And I just started talking a little bit about Artemis of Ephesus and how her statue was really interesting and different and blah, blah, blah. And he really encouraged me to be like, well, if you want to do your PhD, you have to have something that no one else has done before, in theory, right? And so I went into my PhD working on all the things Artemis. And I guess the problem that I found with that was, one, there wasn't very much information. It was the same information over and over again. So I had to literally use Pausanias as like my primary source. He is a primary source, but I had to almost go back and walk through his footsteps to be like, okay, where was this? And where is this? And what is going on here? And two, some of my supervisors were not as encouraging. They thought that the goddess and symbolism and, you know, like ancient goddessy things were dated. You know, they were first wave, second wave feminism, and not really sure that that was something that academia wanted to study, right? So for my dissertation, I had to really curtail it a lot to more theory and methodology and blah, blah, blah. And then once I was free of that and I got my PhD and I was teaching and doing my own things, I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to write what I want.
Yeah.
And, so I wrote this book about the Greek Artemis because I think she is quite vicious. People don't really talk about the viciousness of her, or her wrath and her remorselessness. And then my second book will be on the Artemis of Ephesus, which is a whole other system of belief.
Yeah, one thing I didn't know was that the temple to Artemis is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. I didn't know about that, and I wanted to name this episode the Artemis Conspiracy, but there's already a book by that name, because and it's about it's something weird about a virus or something like that. So it's like really weird. I don't understand, but I found it very interesting because we don't hear about it, and in your videos you make it seem like this has been done on purpose. Because when it comes to especially the church, I mean, since the very beginning we know that it's his story or her story, whichever you want to name it. We know that the mainstream narrative has been skewed, and then obviously that this whole idea of having a divine feminine in the Holy Trinity, especially the Gnostics, which I've studied in depth, there is that Sophia, the wisdom that is there. The Yaldabaoth, which I have on my shirt right now, is she birthed him, but that is heretical. That is not true. And you know how it is. I mean, this is all these people that spoke about this were burned at the stake.
Yep.
You have this idea where she is twins with Apollo, almost like she was too powerful on her own, and then she was given a twin brother. Now, I didn't understand how there were so many different versions of Artemis. And one thing that really piqued my interest was that she obviously she goes by a bunch of different names. The temple, I know there's a replica of the temple too, right? Somewhere in Turkey, I believe it was.
Yes,
and again, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, because I was wrong on one thing already, and I want to bring it up because now I need to know who was the goddess that slayed the serpent. I could have swore I heard that. And so I found this all very interesting, but this idea that it's not only Greek, it goes back to even Sumer. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
And we have the Roman equivalent, which is Diana the Huntress. So why is it that there's so many different names? Is it because there was different sects of people all throughout Greece, or like how does that work? Because I mean, she goes by a bunch of different names.
So there's a couple of things in that I think that you bring up that is interesting. So there's sort of like a pre-Greek Artemis, mistress of animals, Minoan, and we can go all the way back to Sumer and other areas. Then there's like the Greeks arrive and they marry off all the goddesses that were there. Okay, so I'll explain that in 1 second. And then there's the Romans that come in and basically just rename everybody, right? So when the Greeks arrived, what historians believe is this area of the Mediterranean, North Africa, Middle East was ruled mostly by these powerful goddesses that had male consorts. And it was a very harmonious relationship. But when the Greeks, and I say that in quotation marks because there were tribes of people that came from all over the north and settled down into the Mediterranean. or conquered the Mediterranean. Depends if you read Gimbutas or whatever. What they did is they arrived in this goddess culture, let's say fertile land, and thought, well, okay, they have all these powerful goddesses, but what about the men? And so that's when they brought Zeus, which, you know, is very similar to Odin, for example, like in Norse mythology. So there's this kind of male, powerful sky god. And then they married him to Hera, who originally was an individual, non-married goddess, and they made her into a wife. They gave Aphrodite, again, who has very mysterious beginnings, to Hephaestus, and she ends up having an affair with Mars. Demeter, they left her alone, but they made her the mom of Persephone that has nothing else to consider except Persephone. And they gave Artemis to Apollo. They said, oh, they're twins, you know. So every female had a male counterpart except for Athena. But what they did to Athena is they made her as masculine as possible, right? I mean, we call her androgynous, but there's nothing feminine about Athena. And then they changed her story from like having been birthed by a mother to being created out of Zeus's head. So they sort of masculinized, you know, the whole system.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in the case of Artemis, for example, she becomes the twin sister of Apollo, right? So she's not married because she has that maiden status, but she has like a male that she's associated with, you know, she's a half of a whole instead of being a whole on her own kind of thing, right?
Yeah, because she was too powerful, you said, on her own when the Romans came, so they married everybody off.
Yeah. And then when the Greeks came, when the Romans came, like you just said, they just took everything the Greeks had and just renamed them. In fact, they renamed all of them except, of course, as you all know, Apollo, which they really liked his name in Latin. You know, it sounds nice. So then that got passed down. And then I don't know. So it depends when we start the study of archaeology. Like if we start in the 1800s, let's say, when, you know, scholars, rich men in Europe started looking back at the Greeks and the Romans, they focused a lot on Athena because she's the goddess of war, right? So here's like a war goddess. They focused on Aphrodite because there's a lot of sex in her mythology, not too much on Demeter. Hera was the nagging wife. And then Artemis just kind of got shoved as like the kid's sister who runs around in the woods, you know? And they really didn't actually, and in many of the excavations and many of the other space, they just kind of ignored a lot of her material. Even though she was literally like, if you think, I don't know, you guys probably watched 300. Everybody loves that movie, right?
Uh-huh.
The Spartans, and the Spartans worshipped Artemis and would like offer their blood to her before they went to war. And I'm thinking, how can this be missed? Like they used to like whip themselves into a frenzy for her so that their blood would go on her like that's fantastic Hollywood, in my opinion. Like, how could you forget? How could you leave that out? You know? But
interesting.
And you named your book Artemis, the goddess who changed the world. And I mean, until this, I hadn't heard about her. But what were you going to ask, Gabe?
That's interesting that that she's associated with the self-flagellation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of the Opus Dei.
Yes.
They practice the same thing.
Yes. And they were even more brutal. Like they used to sacrifice humans to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then they did that to a few gods, of course, but they used to sacrifice humans to her. And then when they would sacrifice the bulls and stuff, depends on where we're talking about in Greece, because there were different places. They would like put like the bloody bull parts on her statue. So she was a really bloodthirsty goddess.
Yes.
A really bloodthirsty goddess.
I mean, we still got Red Bull today, right?
Yeah,
that's amazing. Actually,
that's right. Yeah.
Right.
This is why I have brought Gabe. We're gonna decide. We're gonna go a little bit deeper than just Artemis. We're gonna. This is what we're here. This is what we're here for, about weaving things in and out. But that was one of the things I heard somebody saying, that Artemis, she is. I heard somebody say this, where she's done more bad than good.
Yes.
Where she was ruthless, how you said, very, very barbaric. I think they killed somebody for talking bad about their mom, where she wasn't able to give birth on any land. And then, you know, they went and killed everybody that didn't allow their mother to give birth. And I found it fitting to talk about this goddess too, because I just had a son. So she is also the protector of babies, no?
Of childbirth.
So
that becomes really her primary role that everyone focuses on, because her story is that when her mother was pregnant with the twins, she came out first, fully formed. And then she helped her mother give birth to her brother. So then she's associated with other pre-Greek goddesses like Elathea and Britomardis, who were also birthing goddesses. So she takes on that role of birthing. But then I think people focus so much on that, they forget her ruthlessness. So yeah, your story is exactly right. Niobe bragged that her children were better looking than, more beautiful than Leto's children. Leto got pissed off. So Artemis and Apollo said, oh yeah, okay. And then they killed Niobe, or not, I don't remember if they killed Niobe, sorry. But they killed all her children. So 9 children, shot them all with arrows as vengeance. I think they left Niobe to suffer afterwards.
Probably. That's fucked up though.
it's cruel, right? So actually her arrows, there are different stories. There are people who beg for death by asking her to come and shoot their arrows into her. So that's like a calm, peaceful death. And then there are people that she kills.
It makes me think of Saint Sebastian. He's depicted as the saint who's full of arrows.
Really?
Oh my gosh!
Which is very quietly also revealing Sabbatai Zeddy, who was almost martyred by arrows. And it's very interesting that Sabbatai and Sebastian sound so similar. These are echoes through time.
Yeah.
You know, they will almost like an avatar or a mantle.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
So that's an Artemis. That would be like an Artemis archetype even before all of that. So that's like the original echo that we're seeing these guys kind of re-embody.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really interesting is that in fact, now that I'm thinking of it, I can't think of another archer goddess. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's this specific skill that she has, like a warrior goddess, yes, a sword a few times I've seen, a shield, yes, but an archer. And she sometimes in pre-Greek times she used to wield the double axe.
Oh, very interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
2 axes, that's Hecate. That's 2 that's also 2 torches.
That's right.
That's a very interesting Hecate reflection.
Yeah, and Neith of Egypt also has a double axe. Right?
Nice.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool because Heka is X's, Te is 2.
Yes.
So it's even like fractal into the name of the spirit of it.
Well, because they had to, you know, part the art of memory and arithmetic is to be able to associate the names and, you know, with the mythology. This is why I tell people like, oh, it was, you know, it's a form of nationalism, all these stories, because there's a few stories with Artemis where it's like this happened this way, and it's almost like Welsh mythology or like the Nordics where they have other gods talking with each other and all these different dramas, if you will. But that's a way for them to remember orally their history, because back then, if you knew how to write, you weren't going to write just some random thing. You were going to write something that was very important. So the art of memory is being able to make these epics up. Like this is why the Odyssey, it's got different interpretations. There's different versions of it. But the main story is the same, but it was because it's been passed down orally so many times that every single person that repeated it would repeat it their own way, but the story hasn't really changed. So that's the art of memory.
Let me weave on that one big time. So it's the living word. This is the living word, the oral. This is the spoken. This is common law. Artemis came first. She's the baby. She's the real living 3-dimensional being. And her brother, I think, is the written law, is the story in the myth that is a burden to keep alive. It's the placenta. It's the afterbirth. We're going into 2-dimensional story realm. We're entering into fiction.
Yeah.
So these are the 2 truths, the 2 pillars of truth. Our words are living truth. It's the living word. It's the oral tradition. It's the story that can ebb and flow and weave. But then we got this written burden that we got to keep and drag around like
that came after the fact.
Right. And that's why it's like statutes. These are statutes and codes, and there's so many of them that you have to be a specialist of a specialist for a lifelong commitment to even be recognized as knowing what the hell this language is about.
That's right. Yeah, there's so many connections that we don't think about, right? Like, and this is one of the reasons why I started the podcast too, because I love talking about the different symbolisms and connections and multi-layers that are overlapping. And we don't have enough, like even when I teach in class, I don't have, because we do so much dates and times and people, we don't have as much time. And I guess, and to be fair, you have to really be interested to see the webs, like you're saying, the webs between different connections, or the connections between different things, but also how purposeful those are, like those are purposely webbed to create a narrative that, let's say, the ruling body wants to share, and other things are sort of forgotten or buried underneath, and then we have to go dig up and see, like, oh, look at this connects to that. So I mean, that's a wonder of archaeology and ancient history, but I think we don't talk about it enough.
Yes.
We see it as sort of like, a lot of people see mythology as like fairy tales. Oh, those are the story the Greeks told themselves, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, these are serious stories, the foundations of our civilization, sort of thing, and we need to analyze them and see where our belief system comes from, by digging into this.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And one thing that I get all the time, because obviously studying Pythagoras, and I forgot how Manly P. Hall put it one time, that mythology was, he put it beautifully. I'll have to look up the quote later. But what people don't understand is, because, I'm in the conspiracy realm of things. I talk about a lot of history, conspiracies, mythology, the metaphysical, the physical, whatever. But what people don't understand is that even till this day, we're still using the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, that Pythagoras made in the year 400 or 500, whatever that was. We're still using it today. And from history is that sprouts conspiracy. So we need to look back at history. We need to understand it, because a lot of people will tell me, why does it matter? I'm like, what do you mean, what does it matter? It's literally, this is everything that we see today comes from those. Like, look at the days of the week. They're named after Welsh gods, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Freya Day, all these things, Saturday, Saturn Day. That's all encompassed in our lives today. So it's very important to look back and to study it and to understand it. And we're only going to understand it to a certain extent, because just like alchemy, it's all encoded in symbols. And it was only, again, for the initiated to understand. This is what a lot of people are, oh, it's just a symbol. Well, for the uninitiated, it's nothing. But for the initiates, that's a whole nother, it's hieroglyphs. It's a whole nother world that's spoken to them. But if you're not part of the club, you're not going to get it. So that's why it's so important to understand. And this is why I love talking to people who are in the field. I see you're actually in the field at these sites looking at money and all this stuff, which is crazy. And I'm a bit jealous. I saw that you went to Petra.
Yes.
One of the places I've always wanted to go to is people don't understand how big and how massive it is. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah, so my favorite thing, I think, and this year I'm going, after I go to the States, although when I go to the States, I have a few things to look up, because the New York Museum and the Chicago Museum has a few exhibits that have some old pieces in there. But then I'm going back to Crete, and then I'm going to head to Turkey for a bit, because there continues to be some mysterious caves, tunnels, buildings underneath. Like in Turkey, they built a lot of stuff that's sort of subterranean.
That's where Darren Kuyu is too, right?
Is he? I don't know.
Turkey. That's Darren Kuyu, the underground city.
Yes. Oh, sorry. That's right. Yes. So there's numerous places where I still haven't gone. There's only so much time in a year and so much funding, but yeah, I think being there is really incredible as well, and seeing, and just like sort of, because then you really see the size of it, the environment of it. You try to imagine what it was like to be there, except of course when I went to Ephesus to see the temple, which was the seven wonders, there's only a pole left,
one pillar.
Yeah, so you just can't stand there and you look at it and you try in your mind to imagine what that would look like, right?
Yeah, because it was eventually destroyed. But this is again, this is what blows my mind about people who, and I'm not bashing anyone's religion, like you're gonna believe what you want to believe, but everything has been, one thing that I heard not too long, I forgot where I heard it. It was, you have the Nag Hammadi and you have the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that is not filtered through the Roman lens. And then you have the canonical version, which is highly filtered through the Roman lens, where it's like there's the same stories, two sides of the two different takes on the same story. But so that's why when they tell me like, oh wow, my religion is the religion, it's like, you don't know that your religion has been replaced 13 times over, however many times since the beginning of time. So you're going to tell me that one time, and 1,000 years from now, is the religion still going to be the same? Probably not. They're going to probably come out with something new. And I mean, look at it since the Greek times, how much it's changed. You know what I mean? So I wanted to talk to you about, so we mentioned earlier how the Spartans would bleed for her, because she is the goddess that doesn't bleed, and but she makes others bleed. And this has to do how she's a virgin, because Gabe and I, we have this idea where it is hidden in history, because especially it's got to do with the placenta. Everything's always attached to the symbol of the placenta and all this stuff. And did
you listen to my podcast on the womb and the cave?
I didn't check that one. I can't wait
to. You would love that. The placenta, the womb, the return to the cosmos, all that stuff overlapping.
I'm slacking. I was listening to the Medusa one, but that's why I wanted to get you on to talk. But this idea of the placenta, right? This dark space, this the caves, and this, we have the monks that would meditate in the caves, deep down underground and all this stuff. But this idea that she makes others bleed, they bleed for her. And the reason that they did that, correct me if I'm wrong, is because they didn't want to sacrifice one full person. Instead, everybody would shed a little bit of blood and it would make up for that one person.
That's right. Yes.
One of the things that I brought up to Gabe, because me and him were chatting back and forth, was this idea of withholding, the idea of suicide through strangulation, where because by you withholding your blood, because blood, we know in magical practices, is something very very sacred with a lot of power and all this stuff. So by you withholding that blood, which is the most sacred thing that you could give to the gods or whatever you believe in, you were kind of sort of taking back your dignity or your respect. Put some respect on my name. Am I getting that correct? Because she's referred to as the strangled goddess.
So the strangled goddess comes out of this old story of this area. So you asked me before why she has so many names. And basically in Greece, because they were divided in tribes for so long, they adapted a goddess and then kind of gave her the last name of their area, right? And sometimes she has different characteristics. So in this one area where she is the strangled goddess, it comes a bit out of this old idea, this old story, again, storytelling, live storytelling, right? This old story that there was a bunch of children playing around her temple, and I don't know, they threw some rocks, they made a mess, blah, blah, blah. And the villagers thought that she would be offended, so they killed the children. And she was so angry that she withheld the fertility of all the women in the village. So nobody could get pregnant. In a way, I suppose she withheld their menstruation. She withheld that lifeblood, right? And then they offered sacrifice to her and all of these things. And after that, what would happen is women would wear the girdles when they were pregnant. And well, there were some before, and then there were some that held the baby. And they would offer those to her afterwards as like gratitude for allowing them to be pregnant, right? So her strangled comes out of this idea. It's a weird way to say it, actually, when you say it in English, but it comes out of this idea that she withheld fertility. She withheld the life force from all the women in the village until the killing of the children was avenged, right? So yes, in a way, she does hold life force, and she has power over life force, particularly around procreation and, of course, the blood of women, right? Now, the Spartans, that was in a different part, obviously, of Greece, and they bleed. In that space, she's called Artemis or Thea. So in that space, she is more like a huntress warrior type, and they bleed in honor of her. So they want their blood to spray on her statue. Not has nothing to do with that, her being strangled and fertility. That's more like a war rite or pre-war.
Yeah, I think right there, that distinction you just made, that line is super important. I think that it's super important because I think there are people who are venerating Artemis who are in very influential places, very high up. And I think something we try to do on the spiders is like bring back these archetypes and the value of them, but it's so hard to separate them from the people who are really well funded, who are putting these signs and symbols into ritualistic use in mass. And I have something really kind of scary to say.
Okay.
And I think that is that we just went through a ritual. I think we just went through a ritual of suffocate the Sophie of Hecate. I think the mask ritual was like you said, Mario, they need everybody to pitch in. It needs to be collectivism. It needs to be collective. We all, for this is the new normal, the greater good, all these things, we're all in this together. I think we were all put into a mass ritual with the whole world. And it goes to this energy we're talking about. And that is really scary to think that at the tippy top, these guys are putting on their family crests and signs and symbols and handshakes behind the scenes. And they just forced us to participate in a ritual that it was really scary for the kids, you know? It was super scary for the kids. So I think that distinction you just made about one was about the suffocation, and then the other cultural, they were coming at it from a different angle. That's super important that we disambiguate so that we can even look at the implications that there are people using these goddesses to put people through rituals that may lend to a more meaning, putting more meaning and context than you ever thought possible to the name MED, Med, USA. Med, USA. And that is really something to think about, that has been here all along in our words. It's always been part of the story, but they're fulfilling it like some kind of weird prophecy. So you look back and you're like, it was them all along, you know, but there is a big spell going on right now to push this, what I consider a Med USA scare tactic. And they have kind of petrified a lot of people.
That's good language there. Petrified. That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Carla, are you aware of where Medusa is in the constellations?
If I look it up, no, I haven't looked it up in a long time. No.
That's where I come at it big time. And I don't know if you are aware, but the fact that you and I are talking about this today is super special.
Yeah, that's good. I'm excited.
It's super special. Basically, Mercury has been expressing a Perseus ritual all week this week.
Interesting.
And we are at a very critical moment as we speak right now. And Mercury has walked backwards in retrograde, like Michael Jackson, doing a moonwalk backwards, almost like a mating ritual. You could even think of it, you know, he can't look at her. He's got to approach her backwards or look at his mirror for her reflection, you know. And so Mercury has gone backwards for a few days now, and he is on the star Algol, which is the eye of Medusa, that is very mythologically powerful because that is the source of alcohol and alchemy, the alchemy of snake alchemy, and the wisdom of, you know, using chemicals and separating the beneficial from the poison, which is what we're trying to do with these myths again. Take away the bad from the good, and maybe reappropriate them with positive vibes. So that's happening right now. So it's really cool we're talking about Medusa because Mercury just did a little seduction dance, and now they're hanging out. And I think he's going to go out of retrograde and leave her behind. So it is very much like Perseus approaching Medusa, taking the trophy, which means stone. Atrophy is a stone. It's a trophy, you know, in her head turns things to stone.
Yep.
And then I just got to say, I think this suffocation thing is a huge part of it. It's a huge part of it. There's been a lot of celebrities being strangulated, the red scarfing. That's a huge part of it. And I think that there's probably some occulted erotic innuendos in play that people don't think about, that strangulation does cause men to turn to stone.
Yes. Yeah. And here's the thing, this plays into the whole, because I'm real big on that too, that we are part of these alchemical rituals without knowing, right? As long as I use King James all the time, where he was, supposedly, again, allegedly, Francis Bacon was the one that edited the King James version of the Bible. King James was a guy who was writing about demonology, witches, werewolves, all this stuff, and how the Rosicrucians supposedly put cryptic ciphers into the King James version of the Bible, and by this one of the most widely used Bibles that there is. And by you reading and carrying their intention, even if you're doing it unaware, I mean, when the Nazis were experimenting on the people, they were unaware of it. There's an aspect of MK Ultra that's the participant has to be unaware of what's going on. So I do believe that there is something more. And they've always said that the Roman Empire never fell. It just got renamed. You know what I mean? So there's also that take on it, where they are using, and we know that the lizard people, they use and they talk to other worldly entities. I 100% believe in that they are in touch with something metaphysical. And it's not just, I forgot who it was, where they were on a podcast and they were like, oh, well, in all your research of history, have you came into anything metaphysical? And they're like, nope, nothing at all. They go, what are you talking about? Like, it's the reason we're here is because of the metaphysical. You know what I mean? Like the entire system, there's been the Code of Hammurabi was mystically inclined to them, and the Ten Commandments, you know what I mean? Like all these things that are at our foundation, our country, in God we trust. What God is that? I don't know, but in God we trust. So the metaphysical has been there since the very beginning of time. I mean, our society's in drenched in it, and a lot of people want to just casually walk by it and ignore it. And if that's what you want to do, that's cool. But this is why it's important to understand, again, back to understanding. They say symbols are the language to the soul. Here they are with all these archetypes. And I think it was Carl Jung that talked about how all these goddesses and gods were archetypes that were projecting outwards and, associating with the, in the unconscious, this is the name for this is the name for that. And one of the interesting things that I found about Artemis too was she's also the light bringer.
Yes.
The light bearer. And we talk about the light bringer being Lucifer. So.
Oh, there's a lot of associations. Yes. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a long story, but yes. So she asks actually to be called, and then she becomes called the light bringer, or Phosphorus, which is, when she's sitting on Zeus's lap and she says to him, right, I want to be, well, I mean, they say a maiden forever. I mean, the word for virgin in Greek, of course, is more pious than hymen, right? And there is actually a movement now with a lot of young scholars that are looking at Artemis as sort of an early homoerotic character or divinity, because she's surrounded by other nymphs and other females. She has no interest in men, nor does she want them to look at her, and then they get punished for looking at her. She punishes women too. And so where was I going with that? I can't remember what I was saying now.
But phosphorus.
Yeah,
phosphorus,
the light bringer. Sorry, the light bringer. So she asks him, so she says, I want a city. I want this many nymphs to be around me. I want to never have to deal with anybody. I want to live on my own terms, and I want to be called and be a light bringer. And in fact, actually, Homer says when he talks about her arrows, he calls them golden shafts of light, right? So when she's shooting people, she's almost shooting them with golden shafts of light, whether it's deadly or whether it's calm, either way. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for her, I think. And Zeus says, yes, like everyone else has a duty. Everyone else has a responsibility. But for her, she just does whatever she wants. And I find that fascinating that no one talks about that. Everyone has, in the Olympic pantheon, everyone has a responsibility, I mean, they call her the goddess of the hunt, but she doesn't have to hunt, and she doesn't always hunt. She just does whatever the hell she wants. And she doesn't answer to anybody. So I almost feel like she kind of escaped, maybe by being ignored, or maybe not being taken seriously. And when the Greeks arrived, her story escaped a bit, or just kind of fell through the cracks. I'm not sure. Some people say, well, her story was very powerful, so they couldn't change it too much. And a lot of women in the wild. So
I see her a lot nowadays.
Yeah.
I see her in Brave.
Yes.
I see her in Princess Leia in the new Han Solo. I see her in Princess Leia.
Tomb Raider.
Hunger Games.
Tomb Raider, thank you. And Hunger Games is a great one.
Yeah.
You know, I really love that. And
what's the one with Keira Knightley, where she's like blue? I think it's a King Arthur.
You can say an Avatar too, where she is blue.
Avatar too, yeah.
The hunter.
She does the double shot. She hits him twice. That's 2 torches. The double. That's the
2 pillars
in the Hecate.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And I love that the Katniss Everdeen brings that cat aspect. You know.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you guys know about all the name is escaping me now, but the women all over the world that were riding horses and shooting with their legs. I can't remember what that sport is called. Is it archery still? Or is it, I don't know.
Shooting with their legs?
You know, so they're on the horse and their legs go up and they shoot with their legs. Have you ever seen that? They shoot the arrow.
Oh my God, that's Scythian.
Is it?
That's totally Scythian. This is the hot stuff, y'all. This is where the she viper really comes from.
You got them all excited now, Carla.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Because her legs are like a serpent that they can reach over and sting like the Scorpio.
Abraxas.
Yeah. Yep. And she's got the animal nature still under control underneath, and
That's right.
And also, I've heard that those Scythian archeress,
yes,
they would put the arrows in their hair, and their hair was anointed with poisons.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
And when somebody gets a little scratch, it paralyzes. It turns to stone.
Oof.
Oh.
Completely and totally substantializing all of the mythology of Medusa and a whole cult of goddesses who were total badasses that men should be scared of because they were total badasses.
Yeah.
And they could.
Amazing.
Yes. In the fact, I just love that the barbs or the bolts, they're not technically arrows. Weirdly enough, they're bolts or barbs. In that they're in their hair as a sheath, in that it's like just so smart to have it like ready to poison every dart so they could shoot. That's really cool.
It's so cool. And they continue to practice that today. Like I've seen it today. I've seen some like in the area that used to be Mongolia, they're practicing it.
Yes.
In Eastern Europe, they practice it. I don't know. I've just seen some images, but so they continue the sport.
Yes.
Even today. You know, which when you watch them do it, it's incredible. You're just like, you're on a moving animal,
right? Like
on your body, and your legs are, it's incredible. It's very acrobatic.
Yes. And I love this. And I just want to point one more thing out. Very popular to that culture, to this kind of maybe sacred occulted bloodline. I've heard that the Mongolian, like the royal family tree is like a mythological body of works that in very obscure book culture, it's like a holy grail to find the actual printed proof of the bloodlines of the Mongolians is a whole thing of itself. But I also want to point out these people, these Scythian archeress, she viper goddess warriors,
right?
They were very closely related to people who do falconing.
Yes, that's right. And they can
hunting with birds.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yes.
Really?
So these things culturally, they will have echoes and expressions through our art, our attempt at venerating Artemis in our art.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think of art of mouth also, the fact that it's passed verbally. The story is the living story. It's passed by word of mouth. I think of Artemis having a nice echo of the art of the mouth.
You know, Gabe, now that you say that, I just think about the men that spied on her. So their gaze found her. She turned around and killed them. Well, she turned one into a deer, right? And then his dog tore him to pieces. And then she killed a couple others. So now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that's a bit of a Medusian, if you can use that word. The sense that the male gaze that is not welcome or wanted ends up being punished in the same way that those who entered Medusa's cave, like I say in my podcast, I mean, people never talk about it, the fact that she never turns women to stone because they never go into her cave to try and kill her. Like, so it's more like whoever comes at me, whoever looks at me, is then punished without my permission, right? So there's a whole, and now that I think of it, Artemis is the same. Like when people are kind of sneaking up on her in the woods, well, men usually, because women don't sneak up on her, she kills them or she tortures them or whatever. She gets rid of them, right, as punishment. So there's, again, that gaze and consequence. There's looking and then a type of death or a type of, destruction.
Right. And, you know, I really loved the point you brought up. I did in that show that Juan shared with me, and I can't wait to get to the rest of your stuff. I'm so excited. But I love the point you made about how it's very common in many cultures for there to be this a fear that if a man sees the birthing process, he will lose his attraction to the woman.
Yes.
And that is a very powerful archetypal weight that it goes unspoken. It's like looming over everybody's potential experience in life.
Yes.
And it's a hazard that needs ritual. It needs superstition to protect the possibility of that from happening.
Yeah.
And I love that you point that out.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, men were never in the room when birth was happening. So perhaps in modernity, we've pushed too far that some things are not meant to be observed by everybody. You know, now you can give birth and your whole family's in the room. Where in the old days, you know, you went into the tent with other midwives and other women, and whatever happened in the birthing tent, it just remained there and whatever. So sometimes I think like we've really pushed or forgotten ourselves in a way, you know, or I don't know, but things have changed in a way that is affecting us negatively, you know, in relationships, you know. And so that stuff creeped me out for a long time because I didn't even realize it, right? I mean, I don't want to see it either, to be fair, right? Like but
it's funny you bring that up, Gabe, because that's one of the things that, because my wife has a cesarean cesarean, right? Yeah, cesarean. And one of the things that I had always avoided because it's already twice. So the first one, I tried not to look at her while she was cut open on the table. And then the second time around, I actually did look because they were like, oh, look, they're about to pull him out. I was like, like, should I look? Because it's like, not that I'm queasy with blood, but it's like, it's kind of, it's too, I don't know, gory. I mean, that's not that it bothers me, but I did look this time. And but I had that thing in my mind too. It was like, should I look? Even she didn't want me to look. I'm like, well, it's supposed to be natural, but at the same time, it's like, you know what I mean? So there is that dogma. I can firsthand tell you that it is true. I don't know how you felt when you had your kid, Gabe, but I can definitely relate to not wanting to look. But it's like something subconsciously that just like told me not to look. You know,
right? And it's etched in your memory forever.
Yeah, that's right.
Very much like a statue, a frozen moment in time forever, psychologically.
And I think also when we say like, you know, everybody says like something is natural, what I'm realizing is that people are forgetting that in nature there's also mystery, right? So it's like we're almost saying, oh, well, you know, this is natural, whatever. We're kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's like, it's just organic something, but there is mystery still in nature. Like I know science is supposed to explain everything and all that, blah, blah, but there's still mystery in all of these things. And perhaps some things we don't have to witness or even understand if we're witnessing.
Yeah, like how are diamonds made or how is gold made? They don't know how it's made. They just speculate on how it's made. And that's definitely true. And that's one of the things I wanted to get into with you about, because we have this, we see it in movies, right? Where the women, they wake up at night and they go into the woods and they do their pagan ritual. The Druids, you know, they're all naked. The Sabbath, we have the witch's ointment. We have all these things that come around. And Artemis, she was known for the orgies and the I forgot how you put it in your book, where you talk about how when a young woman is going into puberty, the wild, the barbaric aspect of the young lady. And I mean, I can see that because I have a sister, and when she was growing up, she was a firecracker. So this aspect of, again, the wild ones, where the wild things are and all this, the mystery in nature. If a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody around to hear it, doesn't make a noise type of thing. You know what I mean? Can we talk a little bit about that? And also the rituals of them wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And because I found that interesting, where we always talk about the unveiling, right? And the initiate needs to stand behind the veil. But then here this goddess is encouraging the mask in order to like sometimes like put on a facade, almost like the opposite of a veil. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the wild. So because for the Greeks, they lived in tribes and villages like most early peoples. They had like the city space, and everything outside the city space was scary, right? But it was also, in a way, freedom outside of politics, outside of economy, right? Even today, we have people like that movie, Into the Wild, or people who go off grid. So that drive, that human drive to be in the wilderness and to be even nomadic has been intrinsically in us. Nice. So Artemis is the goddess of the wild. So she is out there. She's very rarely in the city. And she governs or celebrates, her and Dionysius are the two that celebrate these wild parties at night, mostly, of course, because Artemis is associated with the moon, around the full moon, around the new moon. Then witches later were associated with the full moon, etc.
Can I insert something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I see that as the intrinsic to private and public.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly.
So she's protecting the private side.
Yes.
The wilderness.
Yes. And so when women go out in the wilderness, for example, during her dances or her new moon festivals, they put on the masks to allow themselves to be wild without judgment of the other women. So it's almost like a masquerade ball where you don't know who the other person is. And while you're out there in the wild, you can release or let go of your true wild persona, of your shadow self, of your dark self. And Artemis and Dionysius later, because he has his own wild parties, are part of the celebration or the center of the celebration. And then what happens is Artemis is also the transition goddess. So young girls, let's say, are allowed to be wild until they get their periods, and then they're of marriageable age. And then they do a ritual also out in the forest in which they shed their childish clothes or their wildness, and then supposedly, enter into a maturity where now they have to be wife or whatever. And Artemis is the guardian of this process, of this rites of passage. So they dedicate all their wild clothes or children's clothes. And in fact, if you go to Verona, Greece, for example, is the best example, they leave their toys in her temples too. They leave all the things that are childhood things in the temples of Artemis. So it's like they leave that wildness behind and transition into a type of maturity. And boys do that too with Artemis. Boys, they don't leave childish things, but they go through like a feat of strength, these kinds of rituals where they perform feats of strength. But again, the celebratory god is Artemis. So that's why we call her the goddess of transitions, because she straddles that almost like that childhood to adulthood, wildness to now, I don't know, maturity.
It makes me think of where the wild things are.
Yeah, exactly.
And also the quote of, something, 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 but when I became a man, I left the childish things behind.
Right. That's right. That's in the Bible, right? Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I wanted to, because there's a story of, again, correct me if I'm wrong, where the boys were taken through, was it Crotona?
Yes, the boys that were taken and they were being sold.
Yeah, but this is embarrassing because Pythagoras is from this town. Is it Crotona or Crotona? I forget the name. Anyways, this idea that they were going to be turned into eunuchs. And
that's right.
One of the things that the Artemis of Ephesus, where she's got the multiple breasts, we have a friend, Mario, from Symbolic Studies, that's hinted at the fact that these maybe aren't breasts, because every time, in Egyptology or in any regular place, he's like, they always take like, oh, look at this big breasted statuette. Oh, it must be fertility. It's like, no, what if some dude that was going to school like big titties and he just made a statuette with a big boobs like that? But they always go, oh, it's fertility goddess. We have, for those that don't know, just look up Artemis of Ephesus, where she's got the multiple breasts. But Mario, our friend, he said that those might be testicles. Have you ever heard of that?
You know, it's so funny that you say this one, because I have a friend of mine. His name is Paul, and he's a big Artemis worshiper in the way that I am. And we have this debate because he thinks they're bull testicles, and I know that they're beehives.
Really?
Yeah, they're not breasts in any way. They're not breasts. I think that's a European later imagination, because breasts have nipples, you know, and there's milk, like, and hers, if you look at them, they look like cones, which is what hives look like. I actually saw this really perfect.
Like the pine cone too, because it could also symbolize the pineal gland.
Right. It could. But they say that, so for me, so he always says, oh yeah, because they did these sacrifices to her and threw the bull parts on her statue, whatever. But for me, the one that rings true is that they used to have this wood statue. Of course, the very first statue of her that was brought by the Amazons was a wood statue. And she didn't have anything on her upper body, just her animals and stuff. And then bees started creating honeycombs all around, just building on the wood, you know, because that's what bees and wasps do when they see a. And so that's sort of the beginning of this concept of beehives, and she's the queen bee and blah, blah, blah. There's all these words for her. But yeah, they're not breasts. But actually, the breasts come from Cybele, right? So Cybele is a multi-breasted goddess.
Here we go.
Breasts, yes.
Yes, the Cybele is a doozy. She's everywhere.
Yes.
She's everywhere.
She predates Artemis, and people say that actually Artemis may have grown out of that tradition.
What's the name of the goddess?
Cybele, Kybele.
I've seen it spelled every which way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe with a CY too. Sometimes in English they do CYBELE.
It's like Cybele, is I?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I've seen her before. Yeah, and that's the thing that we're because when it comes to history, I feel like we're all trying to tell the same story, just with different faces on it. You know, we all have the puzzle, but it just the pieces aren't in the same spot where they're supposed to. Because of this, I call it the cosmic game of telephone, where since the beginning of time, everything has been passed down, and it's just been morphed and shaped into something else that it's, you know, from its original form. And the oldest literature that we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh, you know, but what was going on even before that? You know what I mean? What was happening in the Americas while the Fertile Crescent was booming? It's like there was nobody at all on the other side of the world, like at all. Like, no, I think that's bullshit.
Right.
You know, I find a lot of what you're saying there is the fact these are figures and forms of the heavens.
Right.
And they have this animalistic totem pole kind of characteristic where you take these characters in this section of the sky and you squish them together and you get this snake-tailed, sexy lady body and then a serpent head on top. And that's literally the features of that quadrant of the heavens. Yeah. And I can take basically Pisces, Aries, and Taurus and stack them all on top of each other because they all live around Medusa's head.
Yeah.
You stack them together and you get a Medusa shape made out of the glyphs when you combine them.
And you know what's crazy, Gabe, too, is Artemis of Ephesus, not the Greek one, and on her statue, on some of them, she has the astrological symbols around her neck of the cover. People are like, that's so weird, you know?
Right.
How does that? So that's still a mystery. Yeah. Why does she have the astrological symbols around her neck? Because there's no, you know, really fascinating. Thinking of symbolism, actually, right? And the role symbols play, right?
Yes. And, you know, something that would interest you is the fact that the one I described is in the spring, and that's Medusa. She is at 180 degrees, I believe, from the Archerer.
Oh,
and the Archerer is in the fall. So the two characters, this hunter, grounded, somebody who's mastered the animal aspects. You know, the animals do her bidding. You know, she sends the dogs out to work for her. That's in the fall, I believe. That has a lot of those ingredients. But then again, that's not true because the Canis Major and Minor are up in the spring. So that's not fully true. But anyway. And Medusa is at the end of that arrow.
Right.
So the Sagittarius is pointing. I always point the arrow towards the springtime, where the Taurus and the bull is, and so that's kind of where the horns come into play as well. But I just think it's really, that's what I come at it from, is like, this is actually the movement of the sky is often reenacting the ritual of the story.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and back to this idea that maybe we're a part of some ritual, right? Where again, the lizard people, the elites, and lizard people, maybe they might be actual lizard people or not. I like to talk about them in a metaphorical sense. I like to call them lizard overlords. We have this idea, right? Speaking on the Greek aspect of it all, we have one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus of Rhodes, where it's the Greek sun god Helios. And if you look at the comparison between Helios and you look at the Statue of Liberty, you see a resemblance there, okay? And this is, again, we know that Artemis had cults for a very long time. And who's to say that there's not maybe some neo-Artemisians, I guess that's how you would say
There
it.
definitely are. There definitely are.
Well, exactly that there are, they identify with a certain archetype at a certain point in time for whatever reason, and they continue their bidding for X amount of time, which we can all agree that the people in power are shady. And I mean, they do things without our knowledge, and they obscure things, and they're not going to just come out and say it with like, hey, this is what we mean. This is why they, again, back to the symbolism, they code it in symbols. That's what alchemy was, because they couldn't come out and say it because they'd be burned at the stake. So, and I found it because when I was doing a little bit of research for this episode, I came across, I was like, oh, I didn't know it was one of the 7 wonders. That's crazy. They don't talk about that in school. And then I was like looking at the other 7 wonders, and the Colossus of Rhodes stood out to me because I've seen it compared to the Statue of Liberty before. So makes a lot of sense. And of course,
the Statue of Liberty is basically Hecate, right? I mean, she's the torchbearer, right? So she's,
the light bringer.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Because Artemis and Hecate they share a lot of the same, like the moon, the night, all of those things share a lot of the same characteristics. And sometimes in some places in Greece, they overlapped. Their worship overlapped. Same with Selene, with the moon and stuff like that. So I think sometimes we focus maybe a lot on like separating them because we live in a society where religions are so separate. Like mine is like this. And
how do you say it? Compartmentalize things? Because I always fuck that word up.
That's right. That's right. Where the ancients, they just basked in the glory of like 20 gods, 50 gods, whatever. They went from temple to temple, from festival to festival. They understood symbolism. They shared ideas. Like it was a much, I would say, more open-minded, open-hearted, spirituality, right?
Nice.
And so that allows and I'm fascinated by them because they could walk anywhere and interpret things, and we take forever because we need our little book, to like, what does this mean? What is this? But for them, it was so natural, right? Because they thought in these multiple layers, right? Yes. When they entered different places. And I'm a little bit envious of that because for them, things like they would see a snake, let's say, or they would see a halo, or they would see whatever, and they would know automatically. They could sort of compile that, and it could have multi meanings for them, and they could understand in a 3-dimension. You know what I mean?
I love that.
It's fascinating.
I love that you said open-hearted, just as I was thinking to ask you about the color green.
Oh.
And to a large degree, I see just a vast amount of green symbolism layered in. I mean, obviously with snakes.
Yeah.
But another thing that my research has brought forward about Artemis that is like really exciting. It's been a real adventure, and it's hard to like convey the synchronicity of it through the computer to people.
Yes.
Oh, Gabe, and can I add that you and I both do archery? Is that weird? Right? Gabe's an archer. I'm an archer, so it's kind of weird. I forgot to bring that up.
Yes. And my daughter is a Sagittarius.
My daughter's a Sagittarius too.
Yes. What's that?
My daughter's a Sagittarius too.
Nice. I tell her she's a Sage Guitarius. Yeah. So one thing that I found about Artemis that is really exciting is I heard it in the show that I listened to that you did. She has another name that is very similar to Tujon or Tuhon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you pronounce that? How do you say it? Because I've heard it many ways.
Like Tujon.
Okay, now get ready.
Okay.
This is huge, and it just it's the gift that keeps on giving. So that is the key ingredient to absinthe. And I have discovered that absinthe and the spirit of absinthe, the knowledge of the magic that goes into the ingredients of absinthe, is deeply imbued with this Sagittarian energy, and the spirit, I believe, of Diana and this sage Guitarius, because it's such a long journey to convey, but essentially, Tujon is the key ingredient to absinthe, and so is Artemisia.
Mm-hmm.
Artemisia is Artemis's name.
That's right.
And sure enough, my journey has taken me through the tarot cards.
Mm.
And I have discovered that this wonderful goddess is encoded in the herbs and these ingredients. Tujon, Artemisia, all of these are key ingredients to absinthe. And the journey of absinthe through history is absolutely fascinating. She had to go underground,
mm-hmm.
much like Hecate with the 2 torches. It goes underground. It goes through almost an alchemical process of being subjugated, martyred, or put on the black market. And so the history and the culture behind absinthe is has a powerful correspondence with Artemis. Crowley's tarot deck, he changed that card to from the temperance card, which used to mean prohibition of alcohol. The temperance movement was all about prohibition of the spirits,
mm-hmm.
of this alchemical wisdom. And so he changed it to art, which is very nifty way of even bringing Artemis forward more.
Yeah.
In that station, that Sagittarian station. And so I'm just really excited to be able to see the significance of absinthe. I think it's the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
I think that the prohibition of absinthe and the spirit of alchemical wisdom of these serpent cults is being subjugated artistically in The Wizard of Oz. They're looshing her when they pour water on her. That's what you do with your absinthe. So it's got a really profound looshing component. And so, I just had to kind of throw that all on the table because I find it so fascinating that these stories, these myths have real life ritual that is should be preserved and maintained and observed. I'm done.
Yeah, and we got to understand that it's all linked back to alchemy, and since on the topic of spirits, in Sumerian the word bar means temple, and it's weird that we go to bars to consume wine and spirits. Mm-hmm. So again, the play on words there that a lot of people, and I don't like the term woke or asleep or anything like that, but a lot of people don't realize, again, back to this idea that our lives nowadays are covered in this symbolism, and if you don't understand it, you're not going to have the eyes to see. You're uninitiated. You're not saying initiated as in you have to join some secret society or worship some weird god, but just understand it and look into it, because again, it's there, and this is crazy. It's a 45% to 74% alcohol volume. This thing it's like moonshine, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's powerful.
Yeah.
It's true, and I don't think it's an accident. So this is my reason why I always tell people, because they're always like, why do you teach myth? And I'm like, it's so important. Myth and history is so important, and I don't think it's an accident that it's starting to lose more and more funding, right?
Interesting.
And the fascinating thing is when I start talking to my students about all of these things, they are like almost like intrinsically attracted to the conversation. You know, they want to learn, they want to know more. And I find it really interesting that they're drawn, so that we're naturally drawn to this sort of almost mysterious knowledge. I don't know, almost sort of things we don't talk about, but we feel related to, connected to.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, in an institutional setting, like I said, you have to do a lot of dates and times and places. You're sort of educating, well, here's the roll call of history. But I think that there should be room for, I don't know if the word mystical learning is right, but, you know, a kind of learning that goes deeper than just the dates and names and places of events, you know?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, and I've always said there's a mystical comprehension to things and a literal comprehension to things. And I can agree with you on that. Now, we're in the beautiful country where, you know, freedom of religion, where you can practice, because a lot of these things, in order to, and I talked about this with on another podcast, where there's this sort of magnetism to these topics. Like for me, it's the occult and learning about the esoteric, because anybody can look into the exoteric, but when looking within, right, that hidden stuff, that's the stuff that I really like to learn about, because that's what interests me. When somebody's talking about, you know, the mysteries of the universe and the Eleusinian mysteries schools and all this stuff that they were talking about back then, I'm very drawn to that. Like what was it, Gabe, the other day? My soul card was the Hierophant or some shit.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah.
The man of mysteries, which I don't really believe in astrology all that much, but then I'll turn around and tell you that I believe in magic, which is kind of like a paradox. Because when you look at all these grimoires and all these different books on magic, it's heavily influenced by the planetary alignments and where this is compared to that. And I forgot which story it was, because again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Artemis, and was it not Odin, with Orion? Were they the ones that he was about to marry her, but then Orion was killed, and this is why we have the Orion's belt constellation?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
So, which goddess slayed the serpent? Because I could have swore it was one of the serpents was slayed, and then it became Ursa Major. I think was the story.
Ursa Major is the bear, right? That's the bear.
The
Ursa.
Big Dipper and Little Dipper, yeah. Right,
Yes.
Gabe? Am I correct?
Yeah.
Well,
I think you're thinking of like a giant or a cyclops, because giants
The
used
Cyclops
to have,
made the bow for Artemis, right?
Yeah, and then giants used to be half man, half snake, or half creature. They used to have tentacle for feet.
Really?
In Greek mythology, yeah, that's how giants used to be represented. And Artemis is part of the war of the Olympians against the giants. So there's a few of those being slayed. But as far as like a full-on serpent, I actually cannot think of any goddess that has ever slayed a serpent, because the serpent and the goddess are usually one.
Yeah, the divine feminine, because they don't need another name for Artemis. Was the one that I forgot the name, because you said in one of your lectures where she's able to, because serpents, because again, lizard people, their whole thing is they can procreate without a partner. And I believe
parthenogenesis.
Yeah, that was another name for Artemis, where she could didn't need a partner.
That's a very important part. That's a virgin birth.
Exactly.
That's right.
Something to think about.
And Mary couldn't find anywhere to give birth. Again, how her mother, Letos, couldn't find anywhere to give birth. So she was, you know what I mean? So again, there's an Artemis for the Zoroastrians, which we know this is where a lot of the Christians got their symbolism, where that religion is one of the oldest ones that there is. You see the parallels. Again, this is why I say we're onto something. We just have the puzzle kind of mixed up and the pieces are on the wrong area. But absolutely, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, to prep it for the next episode we're going to do on the serpents, because this divine feminine, where it doesn't need a partner to procreate, that's a serpent aspect, and that's what I love about it.
And it kind of like triggers the most primordial masculine fear of all time.
That you're not needed, bro.
They don't need you, son.
Yeah. And, I talk a lot about this because a lot of my podcasts are sort of very feminist in nature. But in the old days, when the men or the chiefs or whatever were consorts to the goddesses, this wasn't like you were lesser than. I feel like a lot of people, when you say, oh, goddesses ruled or goddesses did, somehow they feel like, oh, well, what did men do? Men did everything too. Like you don't lose value. I guess because we're so in patriarchy, we're in such a hierarchy. So if I'm here, you're below me. Where in ancient cultures, especially around the divine feminine, it was circular, right? So it's not a pyramidal sort of hierarchy. It's a circular way of doing everything. And so then men don't lose any respect because the goddesses or the older women or whatever are the chiefs of their tribes. They're still hunting, they're still helping, they're still building, they're still protecting, whatever they were doing. So of course there were men in goddess cultures and goddess worship. Of course there were. And they participated in the rituals. And so I always feel a little bit like we don't have to have only one way of thinking, this very hierarchical model where it's like, I'm up and you're down. If I'm up, you're down. We could collaborate and like have a much more circular way of doing things that everyone is empowered, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel a little bit bad because sometimes I push a lot of that because I guess I'm trying to uncover for a lot of women where some of their fears and insecurities and sort of traditional roles come from.
Yeah.
And often it's a little bit like, well, the patriarchy did this and the patriarchy did this, right? But in a way, like we were all victims of the patriarchy, right? Because we are not the 1%. We're not the authority that created or benefits. We're all in this together, right? So
I think,
so
those points are fascinating. They're super fascinating. They're like pressure points. Like if the government was a machine, a fighting dummy, your sparring partner, one of its pressure points is that parthenogenesis. Women might be able to make babies without you. Look at you take their leg out psychologically. And that's what Ovid was doing.
Take their third leg out, bro.
What's that?
You take their third leg out, that tripod.
That's right, take out the third leg. Yes, ophiolatry. Have you heard that term?
I have, but I'm not. I'm not that well versed in it. Yeah.
It's a fascinating subject we talk about a lot on the Spiders, and it has to do with serpent worship being a Greek metaphor for phallus cults that are really into using the phallus as a sacrificial offering. And this is where the word, like I just said, the word offering, ophiolatry, an officer, a police officer.
It's kind of interesting because Kybele's, for example, priests were eunuchs, and they castrated themselves in
but
a night.
When you're a eunuch, it's just the balls, or is it the shaft and balls?
Yes, but in a way, it's just the balls. But in a way, you sacrificed your fertility, right? So, because technically you have to use the equipment for bodily functions, but in castrating yourself, you sacrificed your sort of, it's not manhood, because then again, now we're associating manhood with this genital thing, but you sacrificed your fertility, your sexual drive, because then you know what I'm saying? So a lot of early priests of goddesses and some gods were eunuchs. And that sacrifice was seen as something that each person willingly did. It wasn't done to them. They willingly did when they devoted themselves.
Yes.
That's a lot of devotion right there. I don't think I could do it.
They would have like a huge party. They would get drunk. They would be high. Like it's not an easy thing. And then they would do it themselves.
Yeah. Right. That's fucking hardcore.
Yeah.
Now, and that one thing that kind of touches on our transformers. One thing that we did a Transformers decode, and I brought up this eunuch class of Rome that is not strictly Roman. It definitely has other, Greek embodiments as well. But the eunuch class constituted 50% of the political sway. So it was a substantial enough population that it could sway politics.
That's interesting.
Versus the lower class, the mundane, the worker class that were not so hoity-toity. So this eunuch class was incredibly substantial culturally.
Yes.
And on the public side, it does look like this virtuous thing of like, I'm above sex. I don't have the sexual proclivities anymore. But psychologically, in Roman military application of this, it had a different meaning. And it wasn't so much that I'm so selfless that I don't need sex. It had a different meaning psychologically. And this is where it gets kind of weird. Again, you come at it from a different light. And it means that you don't value your own presence here, your own value, your own life, the quality things in life. You don't even value those enough. So why would you care to send men to their death?
Mm-hmm.
So psychologically, if you have no qualms with cutting off your own stuff, then you have no qualms with killing these guys, because that's a bunch of other people who you don't have to feed.
Yikes.
Or whatever.
Is that why?
Interesting.
Is that where you bring in the first? Is that where you bring in where the first ladies are actually guys?
We could if you wanted to.
But is that what you're talking about? Because dude,
it's really weird. This
it's
is
fucked.
really weird.
Yeah.
It has crazy implications. But I love the idea of, like, I believe that people who give up their lower drives, they do ascend their you could think of it as like other senses get heightened as a result, and they could be considered prophets. Daniel in the lion's den, he might have survived because he didn't have certain pheromonal processes. And the lions probably didn't mind that he was there because he was clipped. He was sold to the eunuch of the king.
Were Spartans eunuchs or no? They weren't, right?
No.
Spartans were not. That's a very interesting point that you're bringing up, Gabe, because we talk about a lot of stuff on here, and some of the stuff people don't want to talk about because it's kind of but it's important to bring this up because it makes a lot of sense, where they kind of hide this. And in alchemy, sperm is like a big thing, you know what I mean, for the homunculus and all this stuff. And me and Gabe have been going back and forth about the left-hand path and what they do and the right-hand path and what they do. In certain places, I've heard that practice where you withhold it in and you become, again, that golden Taoist homunculus where he comes up and you become this golden little man through not putting out your seed or whatever, and he's supposed to take over for you and you bypass samsara or the Ouroboros, and you don't have to have this eternal life or trapped in this simulation by the demiurge. But it's interesting that we're always, even in society today, it was funny because George Carlin says it's the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And one of the things is what, have a family, acquire a bunch of debt, do all this shit, be a worker, be in the system, be obedient, don't question anything, pay your tithings or whatever it is. And it's related to this whole thing. But these people back then, they were, this is Plato's Republic, where it was these philosopher kings. They were to be withheld from having riches and having all these other things in life because they needed to just focus on one thing, ruling the masses. But then you can see where that could get kind of controversial too, because it's like, what mindset are you coming from, and who am I to tell you what to do? You know what I mean? That's you can go down a very deep rabbit hole with that.
Here I have a great way to seal that right up to the ophiolatry and this Kybelian concept. The word government, it says mind control, gubare, mentes. In Greek, it was kybernetes. And there is Kybel. There is Roman civil law. Kybernetes, fundamentally, linguistically, is the foundation of government. So Kybel and Kybernetes and government go hand in hand. It really goes hand in hand. And it's ancient. It's huge. It's so big, it's hard to see the whole
Who's
picture.
Lady Justice? Who is that? A Greek god or Roman god? The one where
Lady
she's
Justice.
blindfolded with the two scales, or is that Egyptian?
That's later. Yeah, no, that's a later Roman interpretation. Yeah, the Lady of Justice. She's not in the Greek. Well, I mean, Hecate does have the responsibility of justice, and sometimes Athena, but the Romans do the whole scales and blind.
Because one of the things the reason I brought up that serpent thing was because SB Sean, he had sent me this voice clip, and he said, hey, I don't know, I forgot what we were talking about. He's like, hey, I don't know if you know, but Oh, because he was listening to a presentation I did on Pythagoras and the symbolism of numbers, and the number 3, the tripod, which is the Oracle of Delphi, where they're on a tripod. He said that the thing that's coming from the crack underneath, which obviously we know it's a volcano and the gases and all that stuff, but he said that according to one of the stories, it was Typhon or somebody that slayed the serpent, and they put the serpent down at the bottom there, and the decay of that serpent is what's bringing up the gases. Hence why the oracles are having these visions, and that would be like, wait a minute, so be as wise as a serpent. We have some of the Gnostic sects that they believe that the serpent in the garden was actually the good guy. They worship the serpent, and they, in the Bible it says be as wise as a serpent. So he was the one that said, hey, eat from the tree of knowledge, because he was bringing, again, the light bringer. We have these correlations there but Lucifer comes along, but Lucifer is a made up figment of the Western imagination, where if you really trace back the original Luciferians, it goes because of Saint Lucifer. You know what I mean? So we have this figment that came out of nowhere. In the book of Genesis, the serpent was never related to Lucifer until thousands of years later after the fact. So again, some people say that the serpent was Sophia, trying to wake up the creation of Yaldabaoth. So again, back to the serpent ideology, where we have the idea of the divine feminine. We have Mary Magdalene, and how that's, how they say that was Jesus's wife, and how we can relate that to the Holy Grail as well, where they carry this sacred bloodline, and the Nazis were looking for the Holy Grail. You have a bunch of things that you can go down the rabbit hole, but I find it very interesting that it always goes back to the serpent. Serpent worship always goes back.
The serpent at Delphi, I don't know if you listen to my Snake Goddess podcast, but the serpent at Delphi is killed by Apollo.
Is it Apollo?
Yeah, Apollo.
Maybe that's what I got wrong, because I do remember it was either, if it wasn't Artemis, it was somebody slayed a serpent, and then it was
Apollo
put up.
The serpent, and the serpent is a python, hence the Pythia, and the python was female.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that plays into Helios, because that's the sun. Isn't Apollo the sun god?
Yes, Apollo's the sun god, but Helios is a minor sun god as well.
One of the interesting things that I found when I was looking at the Colossus of Rhodes was that it wasn't erected again because of it says, quote unquote, a certain oracle. Now, it's like, hey, you can't have Helios again, or Apollo, or Apollyon, or whoever it is, but you can have Artemis, or the divine, the feminine aspect, which maybe this is how you get the Statue of Liberty, because it's not the man. They're not erecting the male version Helios. They're erecting the feminine counterpart. You know what I mean? So it's like a Kali and a Shiva. It's like, well, if you can't have one, have the other, because they're following that oracle of, hey, don't erect it again because XYZ might happen. But hey, it's okay if you do the feminine counterpart to it. We're not going to say anything if you do that. So I found that interesting when I was coming up with that. But now it makes sense, because I wanted to clear that up because I was confused. But then I had SB tell me that the decay of that serpent underneath was what was making the oracle prophesize and come up with all these visions.
Yes.
It's interesting that it has this fume, this smell or a scent that has, it kind of goes back to that strangulation of like withholding, almost like, think of the archery as like holding back. It's almost kind of like building Parthenia from abstaining from sex. The same thing with the holding of your breath, and then taking that first breath and its effects being like a born again experience, having and even psychedelic implications of a potential fume.
Yeah.
And I want to tie this on to something else that is really important, I think, Carla, because I listened to your show, and I just want to tie it into the fumes that you're talking about, Juan, because ritualistically it has another parallel that goes really underappreciated. And Carla, I think you'll dig it.
Okay.
So I'm thinking about the psychological impact that Medusa she's preserving the language we're going to use to talk about that effect of a man when he sees the birth thing, and now he never wants to have sex again, and she's a monster to him. and it's burnt into his mind. He's turned to stone. He's cold-hearted. He doesn't want her anymore, right? There is something very much like that at play that goes unnoticed and doesn't have enough of a language built around it. But it's intrinsic to the Medusa story, so she has value here. This is in her dominion. And that is that when women take birth control pills, their sense of smell changes. And they go and they choose a mate. And they set a life path with the mate. And they decide, okay, let's make a baby as soon as possible. I'm going to get off the birth control. And maybe it takes them a couple tries. Maybe there's an abortion involved, that it didn't happen the first time, and that has trauma and turns men to stone. And now they don't, you know what I mean? The psychological implications of the entire, everything that goes around a couple trying to make a baby. Well, now she's off the birth control and she can actually smell for the first time in years. And now she knows what he smells like in real life. And now she is callous and turned to stone and not interested in him because he is not on her frequency. He's not really true to what she is seeking. And maybe she finds something somewhere else. Well, the whole time she was on birth control, that's an alchemical, that's something that Pharmakia handed us, which is definitely goes to Ophiuchus, who is in the same region of the sky that Artemis is in. By the way, all that pharmacology, all of it goes to the same location where Artemis is in.
Isn't he the serpent bearer or something like that?
Serpent bearer. So that built up Parthenia of her not being able to smell genuinely. Now she's off of that pharmakia and she smells her husband for the first time. And now he's the monster. Right? And there's a very interesting reversal of the same dynamic. If he sees her exposed giving birth, he doesn't want her anymore. He changes his mind and goes wandering. If she comes off the birth control and smells his genuine self, the attraction is broken. It's not there. The spell is gone. And she can see with new eyes. And she's like, oh my God, what am I doing with this guy? That is a phenomenon. Like and it doesn't have a language. It doesn't have a narrative or a movement. There's not a group of people going like, hey, stop birth control because it's fucking up marriages. Right. And I'm here to say, I think there's an economy built up in anticipation of this phenomenon.
Interesting.
And they do, behind the scenes, they have a narrative. They have words to speak about this effect. And the fact that it has the Artemis spell-casting Parthenia is a signature to this goddess. And it goes to Pharmakia. Pharmakia. Sorry, but I'm done ranting. But that is a real thing. And we don't have the words to discuss what it is. But it's a spell that is on the masses, and there you can harness the effects of those natural psychological phenomenon, and people are making big money off the fact.
I never knew that. Why am I just hearing about that? That's the wildest thing ever.
And think about the fact that the oracle, they're using the fumes. Right. Those fumes, they're using scent. It's right. In the unseen world. And there is a lot to say about the power of smell.
There is.
And controlling the power of smell. And so I just want to put that forward, that we are talking about the same section of the sky and the same modus operandi that goes all the way back to those temples. Very, very interesting.
Like JP Morgan says, millionaires don't have astrologers, billionaires do. So 100% that I think that this is linked to some other sinister things going on behind alchemical means behind the scenes. And I'm 100%. Who was I talking to about how, modern day Ouija boards. I mean, the AI is the modern day Ouija boards. When you're recommended something on YouTube or your favorite social media, that's an AI telling you, hey, check this out. You know, and sometimes we have this, I thought I was looking into videos about that. Oh, here's this other one. Well, here you go. Well, you're already partaking in that, whether you like it or not. So, you know, you're a cog in the system, and you're another wheel, and you're just pushing that intent along. So I think we can wrap it up there, and we could prep maybe say something else and prep it for the next one about the serpent? Or I think we're good there, where the serpent is the one giving the visions to the oracles, because it plays into the other episode, the serpent goddesses, oracles, and I forgot what was the last word on there.
Mothers, prophetess, and goddesses, I think, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So I think this one great.
We have so much to talk about with serpents and women, snake knowledge. Like, yeah, definitely. There's so much. We barely scratched the surface.
Yes, and I mean it's a given, especially since this is a goddess with like how many names to her. I mean, you can't even keep up in stories and all this stuff, but it's very interesting. And Gabe, I don't know if you want to join us for the serpent talk or not with the lizard people, because I love talking about lizard people, so I think it really plays in. But I had a lot of fun today. I learned a lot, and I think we were able to weave some things in there that maybe we hadn't planned to talk about. You know? So hopefully we didn't weird you out too much, Carla, and you'll come back and talk to us. But
I mean, my whole specialty is mystery cults, so it's all right. Yes.
You know, I'd love to just jump in before I say goodbye to you. I want to invite you on the spiders with us sometime.
Okay, sure.
It's a kind of a commitment because we're like night owls.
Yeah.
I tell everybody to pack your homunculunch and take a nap before you come, because we go pretty late into the night. But we would love to share with you and dig into your work and bring some reflections that you might, enlighten us on.
Fascinated. Sure.
This is great because Hecate, I was very into Medusa for a very long time, and then I tried to set that aside, and sure enough, Hecate comes in to the picture, and now she's everywhere I see, and it's just beautiful that I'm talking to you on this very fateful day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely why I wanted to have Gabe on, because he'll weave some stuff in there that I wasn't thinking about, and then it'll bring something up in my mind, and I'll be like, all right, let's go back and forth, and had a lot of fun. Can you share with us where people can find your book once again, Carla, your social media?
I'm just show you the cover so you can see it. My book is everywhere, I think. On social media. So if you find me at Artemis Expert, I have one of those link trees, and you just click on it. You could buy the book. But like Amazon, I don't know, Indigo, Barnes and Noble, blah, 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 everywhere. It's available everywhere. And the Kindle too is good, like, because I read on Kindle as well. Like, I have a copy of my own book, but I like reading stuff on my phone. So yeah. And I'm thinking of doing an audio version of it too.
You should.
Yeah, I'm thinking of doing that. So if anybody wants to listen to it while they're driving, Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Carla, for coming on and taking time out of your day. I really enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.
Yes, we will. So good to meet you all, guys. So good to meet you all.
Absolutely.
All right.